Hey guys, welcome back. So now jumping back into Excalibur, which of all the different series gives us the closest look at the true motivations and priorities of Apocalypse. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so in our last talk with Apocalypse running into the issue of not having a suitable power source to create access to this doorway, which would allow him to enter Otherworld whenever he wanted, and also shut off all those creatures that had made their way through. But with running into this issue and Rogue wanted to kill him anyway, it turned out to be the resolution for everything, because now they have the door that works and all the creatures have been sent back. And so now, as in the case of Apocalypse and his resurrection, it's here that we find out that there's a bit of a high priority system that's set in place for the members of the Quiet Council, because after Rogue kills him, they bring him right back. And of course, Charles restores his memories and Apocalypse is fully back. But even still with this, with Xavier, there's a bit of this frustration, if you will, because in a way he kind of feels like Apocalypse is abusing the system with him intentionally dying. But even with this concern, there's no like Charles getting into it with Apocalypse or Charles trying to hash it out with him. He really just goes through the motions of bringing Apocalypse back, and it's from there that Apocalypse just continues back where he left off. And something important on top of that is that when Apocalypse comes back, he's met immediately by Jamie Braddock, who usually isn't welcome here because how his powers disrupt the resurrection process, but even still he arrives immediately because there is much more work to be done. And one of the crazy things about this as well, which probably leans into some of the concerns of Charles Xavier, but it's like when we jump back in and we see Apocalypse being resurrected, and then we go back over to Otherworld and we see that huge blast come through hitting Camelot, which of course was a result of Apocalypse's death. It almost makes you think like, man, like how fast was that resurrection set up? Because essentially Apocalypse could have sent a message to Charles Xavier, kind of like, man, warm the pods up, man, I'm about to come through, to kind of fast track the preparation like just before he died. Because prior to this point, we've seen him do that to other members of Excalibur as far as projecting his thoughts and giving them directions and instructions. So it's likely he may have done the same with Charles just to skip to the front of the line so that he could get back out there with Excalibur as quickly as possible. And though we don't get it explained that thoroughly, I do believe like that's the reasoning behind Charles Xavier feeling some type of way about Apocalypse abusing the resurrection priority system. But with Apocalypse making haste to get back out here, it wasn't like he was rushing out here to help them out, and he expresses that to Betty right away, who's mainly concerned about them being outnumbered. But it's funny because the response of Apocalypse is like, you being outnumbered is the last thing I'm worried about, because anything getting thrown at you guys for the time being, like Rogue got it covered. And really during this time where Apocalypse was gone, like she really did, because essentially she was Apocalypse and Rogue in a 2-for-1 on the battlefield, holding it down like a champ. But also with Betsy expressing her concern with there being more soldiers coming on top of what they're dealing with, it's here that Apocalypse expresses that he has that covered as well, because at this point in time he wants to speak to Morgan directly, and rather than continue this war, place a wager that'll resolve everything. And with doing so, he insists that they have a duel to the death between their selected champions, to where he chooses Betsy knowing that Morgan would choose Brian. And when it comes to this point, you can tell that this is something that Apocalypse has thought out for some time, because when Morgan agrees to this, it's almost like she's accepting an offer that she couldn't refuse, especially with Apocalypse mentioning about mutant resurrections and that if Betsy dies, she'll be brought back. But in the case of Brian, not so much having that luxury, he'll be fighting for his life, which more so had Morgan feeling like he'll fight harder and he'll win the duel. But here's the thing, because as soon as it gets started, Apocalypse, he starts walking around and setting up things, like he goes to Jubilee and he tells her, hey, get Shoko ready. When I tell you I need some fire, I'm gonna let you know, I'm gonna give you the cue. And of course, you know, Jubilee is gonna be like, well, I thought fire was a bad thing because that's how we got into the problem just before this. But of course, with Apocalypse, who has his plans set in motion, he's like, you know, don't worry about that, I got something for that, just do what I say when I'm ready. And like, to me, like, had I been Morgan Le Fay, like in this moment where you have a bet going with Apocalypse, duel versus duel, champion versus champion, and immediately when the duel begins, he starts going around talking to people, looking this way, pointing that way. Like, I would have been like, hey, where you going? Where you going? Hey, why you talking to them? What you talking about? Hey, don't do that, don't do that. What's that? Like, I would have been super skeptical. And it comes to a point within their battle where they scuffle over the sword and Brian lands right on top of it, killing him. And when this happens, Apocalypse is conveniently standing next to Jamie Braddock. And I'm telling you, man, like, had he been in Vegas, they'd have been like, hold up real quick, we need to check the camera footage. Like, something just ain't right. But as soon as Brian's killed, Apocalypse then gives the word to Jubilee to get Shogo to spill fire, and Apocalypse is already moving to the next step. He just steps to Morgan, he's like, alright, boom, your place is on fire, you lost, get your stuff, let's go. But no, really, he tells her, okay, well, things are shifted around here now that you lost. And effective immediately, you gotta bow to your new king, Jamie Braddock. And along with this agreement, like, Apocalypse promised Morgan exile, but the thing is, the exile gonna be here. And we'll see the reasoning with that later on, because every little thing that Apocalypse is doing here, like all the pieces, each and every one of them has their reasoning. And of course, immediately, like after this is done, Betsy isn't necessarily happy about her brother Jamie being the new king, but even with that being so, this still is her brother, and she firmly puts her foot down for him to bring back their other brother who was just killed, and Jamie was just gonna sit there like, okay, wasn't nothing happened. But of course, Jamie brings back Brian, which has its other consequences, which we'll see later on. But right after this, when we get a bit of Betsy questioning Apocalypse for making Jamie the king, like when Apocalypse responds to this, he gives her a bit of a logical answer. And it's not like Apocalypse needs to explain himself to Betsy, but this is one of those examples early on of one of those things to where Apocalypse, he really does want Betsy to trust him. And it's for that reason that he does communicate to her in times like this. But the reasoning that Apocalypse gives Betsy, which is pretty much falls into the same thing that I mentioned with Jamie being perfect to rule Avalon, is because Otherworld is a place that's constantly changing, it's a fragile reality, it's unstable, and who better to have here in your pocket than somebody who can manipulate matter, who doesn't share the same weaknesses as this realm, with the most recent example of that being Dragonfire. But as far as what I was speaking of before, with there being consequences along with Brian's resurrection, because later when they get back to Earthrealm and return back to Braddock Manor, Brian tells Betsy that he was visited again by Merlin and Roma, and given the decision between the Amulet of Right and the Sword of Might, much like when he had first became Captain Britain, just that this time he chose the sword instead of the amulet. And he expresses that he believes that the reason why he had made this different decision this time around, it was because that innocence which he had before when he chose the amulet, he believes that part of him died when he was under the control of Morgan Le Fay. And when he died in this form and came back, he still feels like that part is gone, even though he's no longer under Morgan's control. But here's the thing, because even still with him accepting the sword from Merlin and Roma, he's still given the powers which come along with it. But even still with doing so, his loyalties lay with Merlin and Roma. But with Betsy being the new Captain Britain and being the wielder of the amulet to whom they didn't select, it isn't but a matter of time before they will turn Brian against her to reclaim what they believe to be theirs. And it's because of this that Brian requests that Betsy takes the Sword of Might far away from him so that they'll never come to this. And with doing so, Brian likely just having the fear that he'll be controlled by Merlin, much like he was with Morgan, and really just coming to the resolve that hopefully if he just keeps the sword away, then he'll never be commissioned to carry out that task. But from here, jumping back over to Otherworld, to where at this time things are a bit simpler, because now you really just have King Jamie of Avalon versus the forces of your White Witch, which don't seem to be much of a problem to Jamie because once again, Omega level mutant and reality warper. So essentially there's that. But it's around this time where we see him go to give Apocalypse an update about the White Witch, to where Jamie walks in on Apocalypse doing this living autopsy on Morgan Le Fay, to where I could just imagine Jamie walked in and just like for a moment was just like, what the hell is going on in here? But you can tell that Apocalypse didn't necessarily want Jamie walking in on this, and even though he has, it's not necessarily like it's a huge problem. But as it turns out, we discovered that Apocalypse is studying Morgan Le Fay and recording in his grimoire the genealogy of a witch in relation to magic and mapping it out much like the information on a mutant and their genealogy in relation to their mutant powers. And it's really one of those things that just harkens back to what we had discovered about Apocalypse and why he had kept Rogue locked away in that space between Earth and Otherworld, when we had got a glimpse into his plans of wanting to upgrade into like this ultimate mutant magic wielder, which of course was a plan that he had to throw on the back burner with Rogue getting out and him having to settle for just being able to open a door to Otherworld at any given time. But with Rogue getting out and prolonging that plan, we know at this point that it is still something that he's working on, and whether or not he still may need Rogue in that in-between realm with the stars aligning and all that other crazy stuff, that we have yet still to see. But with what he's doing now with Morgan Le Fay, it seems like he has the same goal in mind, but this time he's taking the more practical approach, or maybe just doing more research on how to do it again. But real quick, just want to give a shout out to all the Patreons. Thank you guys for all your support, and for anyone who would like more information on how to become a Patreon and support the channel, I got a link down in the description where you can head over to patreon.com/DopeSpill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Hopefully everyone out there is staying safe, and even with doing so, like, call your relatives, man. Tell somebody hi, like through the phone or FaceTime or something. And if you ain't got nobody to call, just keep squatting up in the comments, man, because we here. But that's it for this one, guys. Share your thoughts below, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.